Hey there, this is Pat Ennis of Ennis Legacy Partners. Welcome to the Exit Readiness Podcast. My co-host, Walter Dial's traveling today, so we have a guest co-host, and it's actually my business partner, Corby McGordon. So, Corby, you have some pretty big shoes to fill here today. So,
been up all night worrying about it.
Yeah, well, don't mess up.
Yeah,
okay?
I'll try not to.
All right. Our mission here on the podcast is to provide you, the business owner, with subject matter expertise on topics pertaining to building sellable business value and for planning your eventual exit from the business. We want to help you exit your business successfully and on your own terms and conditions. And today, we couldn't be more excited because today we have a rock star guest in our world when it comes to experience, knowledge, and thought leadership around building a business that's sellable. Our guest is John Warrillow, founder of the Value Builder System. And the title of the podcast today is, Why Should a Business Owner Build to Sell? John's the author. He's the founder of the Value Builder System. He's also the author of a couple of books on the topic, Built to Sell and the Automatic Customer. And if you're at all interested in what we're going to talk about today, we would strongly encourage you to buy and read both of those books, Built to Sell and the Automatic Customer. They're must-reads. So our firm, Ennis Legacy Partners, has adopted John's Value Builder System. Myself and one of our associates were certified in the system, and we've adopted it to help our clients build that business that's going to be sellable and at a maximum value with minimum risk. And we've adopted it because John himself has personally built and sold businesses successfully, so he's got street cred, if you will, in regard to this whole topic, but also because he's done a ton of research and analysis on over 40,000 companies. So we have a lot of confidence in him. And we're excited to have him again here with us today. John, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, good to be with you both.
Yeah, so John, in getting to know you and your organization over the last couple of years, it seems to me that you're somewhat of a data and or research geek. Would that be an accurate assessment?
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. My last company was a market research business, and certainly everything we do at Value Builder is really based on research. So I think that's a very fair assessment.
So John, let's jump in with the topical question. Why should a business owner build to sell?
Well, it's a great question. At the end of the day, we take so much risk as entrepreneurs that, the real payday is on the exit. That's where the wealth is created, and it's only going to get created if you build a business that doesn't rely on you. So many, I think, owners really chase revenue as the goal and think, okay, next year I'm going to be a $2 million business or a $5 million business or $10 million, whatever the kind of top line revenue goal is. But if we build that company where the owner is the one doing the selling and is at the sort of center of the business, there isn't much transferable value. And that's okay if you've been pulling out kind of dividends along the way and you're kind of paying yourself. But so many of us as owners don't, right? We just pay yourself a modest salary and say, well, when we sell, we'll kind of make some money. And it's only if you can structure it in a way that's sort of works without you do you ever have that sort of payday.
Is focusing on the exit a distraction from running that day-to-day business?
No, in fact, opposite. I think it's the absolute proper lens to come at the running your day-to-day business. You guys know we do an exercise, and we'll do this with your clients as well, this shortlist builder exercise, right? Which is kind of module 11 in Value Builder, and it helps you identify who the ideal candidates are to buy your business. And oftentimes we get the question, like, why would I want to do that? I'm a decade away from selling. Why on earth would I care who my strategic acquirers are? The reason I think you want to care is that you can start making decisions right away based on, what the ultimate acquirer is going to find attractive. Let me give you an example. I did a podcast episode probably a couple of years ago now with a guy who had a brand of frozen yogurt. And he built it up and it was a successful brand, got it into Kroger's and some of the big, chains in the US. And he always had a dream of having yogurt stores. Like he wanted retail presence. He wanted people to be able to walk in and get yogurt from a retail high street. And so he built a whole group of stores, built 50, 60 stores, and went through all of the machinations of hiring part-time employees and all the nonsense associated with hiring kind of junior employees and all the turnover and so forth. Ultimately, he reached a point where he decided to sell the company. And he went out to the marketplace, and no one knew what to do with him. Like some people looked at him as a brand and liked the brand and the fact that it had infiltrated Kroger and some of the big retail shops. Others looked at it as a retail business with stores and employees. And so nobody bought the company and nobody was willing to pay for what he had created. Ultimately, he sold the business at a bit of a discount, and the buyer simply, the day they took ownership of the company, shut down the 50 stores. So essentially, he spent decades building this 50-store network and going through all the headaches of that for nothing because the buyer didn't value it. And I tell you that story because I think building to sell from day one is not a distraction. It is, in a sense, what you should do. That every decision should be made through whether you hire salespeople or what location you have or whether you adopt Salesforce.com or whatever other software stack you use should be done through the lens of who's the ultimate buyer and what are they going to value.
Given what you just said, it seems like actually doing less can help the business grow more and more effectively.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the big mistakes I think we make as entrepreneurs is we have shiny ball syndrome, right? Meaning, you have a great product, it's going well, you're serving a niche, and then all of a sudden there's a new product that comes up, or a customer says, hey, would you, consider selling X product? Or, hey, we've got this problem, could you come up with a solution for this problem? And we start to dilute ourselves beyond the kind of core of what we set out to do as a business. And the problem with diluting your product by cross-selling a lot of products, especially where you're not really differentiated offering those, is that a buyer is most likely not going to value those undifferentiated products. It's like when you buy cable, right? TV. Many of us are no longer using cable because we're sick of paying for 200 channels we no longer use, right? Like nobody uses most of the channels they buy. And as a result, we resent that. Similarly, acquirers, when they look at your company, if it's a hodgepodge of different products, and really one jewel, but then a bunch of undifferentiated products and services, they're not going to value the undifferentiated stuff. So it's kind of like a mirage, kind of, like growing your revenue by cross-selling a bunch of ancillary services and products may feel good, but it's just really running on a treadmill. So we're real believers in focusing on value, focusing on being the best in the world at doing one thing. And almost at the expense of revenue. It's certainly not chasing revenue for the vanity status of being able to puff out your chest and say our revenue is X or Y.
Could you comment along that lines on products versus services?
Sure. So all products need a service wrapper or they'll get commoditized, and similarly, all services need to be productized. So let me say that again. So if you've got a product business, the problem with a product business is eventually, unless you add a service wrapper, it's essentially going to get commoditized. Even if you protected it with all the best IP lawyers in the world, even the iPhone, when it first came out, as revolutionary as it felt for most of us, it got ripped off by Samsung within a few years, right? And so now we're all running around with phones that look and feel much like the iPhone. What really differentiates iPhone is the experience of buying it. You go into the Apple store and it's a totally different experience than going to a Verizon wireless store. It's a completely different experience. And so if you have a product, I think the goal should be, what is the service wrapper that romances the customer into thinking they're buying something totally unique and totally differentiated? Similarly, if you've got a service, most services are dependent on the human being offering them. Right. And in the absence of productizing a service, you are simply going to evaluate the person offering the service. So if you're hiring an accountant, you want to know, well, what other clients has he worked with or she worked with? What they ever worked with a company in my industry? If you're hiring a window cleaner for your home, You might want to know, hey, have you worked in my neighborhood? Have you ever worked on houses that look or similar to mine with tinted, whatever? You want to ask the individual you want to ask these questions of the human being offering the service, because we don't give them anything else to evaluate. Yet if you productize your service, if you've got the 5-step home window cleaning service, or you've got the 9-step business performance system, if you're an accounting firm, you're productizing it. You're making what they're buying independent of the person delivering the service. And so that's really, in my experience, for service companies, the real secret to scaling beyond the human being offering the service is productizing it, making it sound and feel like they're buying a product.
Yeah. So, hey, John, staying on this whole category of products and services, talk about where owners can get into trouble with products and services in relation to what I've heard you reference over and over as the owner's trap.
Sure. So the owner's trap happens very naturally. Michael Gerber, a tremendous author of the E-Myth, great book, talked about the entrepreneurial seizure that entrepreneurs have, right? Where they have some technical expertise, and as a result, they start a business because they're a technician. And many entrepreneurs find themselves in the same. They're great car mechanics. So instead of going to work for a car mechanic, they start a car mechanic or an auto shop. They're great accountants. And as a result, they start an accounting practice. So there obviously is a difference between being really good at something and running a company. And the problem with being really good at something is that oftentimes it tempts you to go deeper into offering a wider swath of services or products. Because as a subject matter expert, as an industry expert, you will get asked by customers to do more than you expected to do when you started your business, right? So if you're a window cleaner, as an example, and you're the world's greatest high-rise window cleaner, as an example, customers will say, wow, you're really good at cleaning windows. Eventually, someone will say, I know you do high-rises, but could you also do apartments? And if you're like most window cleaners or most business owners, you say, sure, I'll do apartments because I know how to clean apartments. I know how to do high-rises. Certainly I can do an apartment. And then someone will turn around and say, I know you do apartments. Could you also do homes? And pretty soon you've diluted your service offering from being the world's best, cleaner of high-rise windows with a very specialized set of rig and ladders and equipment, whatever high-rise people use. And now you're just diluted to every other home window cleaner. And that's when you get stuck in the owner's trap, because if you're offering too broad a set of services, it's very difficult to train employees to deliver them. And when you can't train employees, you all of a sudden get customers asking for you personally to do the work. They're like, yeah, I know you have employees that you train to be window cleaners, but man, we have a really complicated house, or we have a really expensive chalet, and we want you personally to clean those windows. And all of a sudden they see you as the expert because you haven't productized, and you're stuck, and you're in the owner's trap. And I'm sure, Pat, you've seen this in your own, with your own clients, where they'll like plateau, right? They start and they might hit 300,000 in revenue, or 500,000 in revenue, or $1 million in revenue, 2 million, and they just can't get beyond that, and they start treading water at that revenue line item, and they've got a successful business, but it just can't grow. And many times that's because the business is just too dependent on the owner.
Yeah, and we've seen when we see that dynamic, it's typically because of something you referenced earlier, John, in regard to chasing revenue, and you've mentioned this often too, is that most entrepreneurs, the reason they become entrepreneurs in the first place is for freedom and control over their life,
yeah,
and in the business and out of the business, and then what happens is this owner's trap, right, kicks in. And where did all that freedom go? Where did all that control go that I was hoping for?
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing like talking to a business owner stuck in the owner's trap about how many hours they work, and it's, they work more hours for less money than they would for a company, right? And they think, oh well, maybe I'll make it up when I sell, maybe, but there are very few companies that want to buy a business that's dependent on the owner. And so now you've worked 20 years or 30 years for less money than you would in a job, for less benefits, no overtime, no 401k. And you turn around after 30 years and say, okay, now I want out. And there's nothing to sell because it's you. Essentially, you create a job. I'm painting a very negative picture. I don't mean to be negative. It's just that's the worst case scenario. And our, what we do at Value Builder with your help is really try to help companies do exactly the opposite, is build really valuable companies that are not dependent on the owner. And that gives them control. Like you mentioned control. One of the things I've really noticed about owners that we work with is they love that feeling, the endorphin rush of being in control, right? And that sense that they are calling the shots. It's, I think, why they start businesses in the first place. And here's what happens when you're in control of the sale of your business. You're getting inbound offers, right? So we know with Value Builder, you get a questionnaire complete. The average score is 59 out of a possible 100. Those businesses, about 12% of them, 12% of the average business, across 46,000, about 12% of them have received a written offer. Yet if we isolate our users that have achieved a Value Builder score of 90 or greater, so these would be the sort of valedictorians and top performers, they are 3 times more likely to have received a written offer to buy their business. And you want to talk about feeling in control. There's nothing that will make you feel more in control as a business owner is having inbound offers to buy your business, is getting companies again and again calling you up and saying, would you consider selling to us? Would you consider us as a potential strategic partner? You don't have to sell. You may not want to ever sell, but there's nothing more tantalizing than feeling in demand and getting unsolicited offers for your business, because you know that if you ever engaged, you'd be in the driver's seat, right? You control the terms. To some extent, you control the price even, but certainly the terms associated with selling, because you were so sought after. And that only happens if the business is really structured in a way that's, that we really kind of try to do at Value Builder, where it's really about not being dependent on the owner.
John, what you just said there simply makes so much sense to a business owner. But there's an element of asking them to die to themselves or to give up their baby, at least as they perceive it. How do you...
giving up control of...
Right.
Because really, if it's going to be built in the right way, long term, at some point they do have to give up some control, don't they, in order to see that happen?
Yeah, they're shifting control of the day to day versus control of the exit. How do you move an owner from one mindset to another mindset?
Yeah, let me give you two ideas on that. The first is that, from my experience, a lot of owners they get that sense of satisfaction from scratching the creative itch they need by serving clients, right? By having a customer come in and say, I've got this really complicated problem. I want to clean the windows on my 200-story office tower. Nobody knows how to do it. I've got to design a unique rig, and you're the world's expert on cleaning windows and office towers, so I'm coming to you for your expertise. And that just blows the ego up of the owner who has that expertise, who's been in the window cleaning business for 46 years. He's like, yeah, damn it, you're absolutely right. You came to the right place. Let's dive in. Let's solve this problem. I'm going to create a unique solution just for you. And they get this endorphin rush of being the go-to guy or gal in their industry. And that happens in virtually every industry. It's not window cleaning. It happens to accountants, to lawyers, to car mechanics. It is that desire to creatively come up with a solution for a client. And that's what we need to turn off. And instead, turn that creativity, the desire to create and develop and create something out of nothing, into your business, into the way your business is designed. And so, instead of thinking of your clients as your ultimate client, you want to think of your company as your client, and applying those creative resources to the way you design your company. So the way you design your invoice, the way you design the customer onboarding process, the way you design the way your office looks or your storefront looks, is trying to scratch that creative itch, not by solving an individual client's need, but really being the solver for your business. I remember I got a chance to go to this thing It had a really pretentious name. It was called the Birthing of Giants. Can you imagine a more pretentious name for a gathering of entrepreneurs? They've renamed it called. It's now called Entrepreneurial Masters Program.
Yeah, that's what we call our weekly staff meeting.
Is that right? Birthing of Giants.
Yeah.
In any event, it was called Birthing of Giants, and there were 60 entrepreneurs selected from around the world, all of whom had to be under the age of 40, growing fast growth companies with at least $1 million in revenue. That was the criteria, and they had people apply, and they were selected. So you can imagine the egos in the room. Anyway, I was fortunate enough to be chosen to be part of this group, and so I'm in this room, and there's an auditorium full of like an amphitheater style seating, and so I can see all the other entrepreneurs in this room. And we had a speaker come in. Guy comes in, and he's talking about building value, and he says, "Listen, I want everybody in the room to answer a simple question. What percentage of you guys, so raise your hand if you're involved in selling your product or service?" And as you might imagine, 60 entrepreneurs, like 60 hands go up in the air. Every entrepreneur in the room is kind of proudly, saying that, yeah, I'm involved in serving specific clients. Absolutely. And he then committed and followed to admonish every single one of us in the room. And he said, you're selling the wrong product. Instead of selling your product, you should be selling your company. Hire salespeople to sell your product, but your job is to sell your company. Whether you want to sell it now or in 10 years, your sales skills and that creativity of trying to solve a problem for a client should be invested in identifying strategic partners, having acquisition conversations, figuring out who the competition is, making sure they know about who you are. And it was such a fascinating sort of pivot for everybody in the room who walked in thinking, yeah, my job is to be a rainmaker for my company. And they all just kind of walked out. We all walked out with our tail between our legs thinking, man, I'm doing it all wrong.
Yeah, you just touched on a mind shift. Obviously, fear comes into play for owners in making these changes. What kind of fears do you commonly encounter that need to be overcome?
Yeah, I mean, clearly one of the first things that we do, and again, you guys would know this as certified value builders, we go through the scalability exercise where we're trying to get an owner to really figure out which of their products and services have the capacity to scale up. So we look at all the different products and services that an owner sells, and we say, okay, how teachable are these to an employee? How valuable are they to a customer? In other words, how differentiated are you offering them? And then how repeatable are they? Meaning how much of a recurring revenue stream can you create through these? So teachable, valuable, repeatable, TVR. And this is, as you know, the first step we take clients through. And I think the biggest objection we get in taking clients through that process is, well, I'm going to shrink in revenue. I don't want to shrink. I can't stop offering XYZ service, or I'm going to shrink in size. And again, I would just encourage people to remember that at the end of the day, it's not revenue necessarily that acquirers are going to value. The strategic acquirer is going to value what your business is worth in their hands. So let me describe it. So you've got financial buyers who are buying a future stream of profits, essentially. So for them, private equity companies and so forth, you want to make your business as reliable as you can. But for strategic buyers, they're really buying what your business is worth in their hands. Let me give you an example. So Stephanie Breedlove is a woman who built a payroll company, but she had a unique little niche in the world where she did payroll for parents who have a nanny to pay, right? So she had a bad experience at ADP, and she said, we can do this better. We're just going to do payroll services for parents with a nanny. And she built this thing up to $9 million in revenue. And along the way, she reached a fork in the road. It was only at $300,000 in revenue where she decided she needed to grow, but she didn't know how to grow. So she, on one hand, could have chosen to grow by cross-selling other services to busy parents, right? So like meal preparation services or snow removal services, like those sorts of things that busy parents with 2 incomes and 2 kids need. Or she could choose the harder route, which was to continue to find more parents who had nannies to pay. And when she reached that crossroads, she took the harder of the two routes, and she started to look for more parents with a nanny to pay. And in so doing, really doubled down on that niche, that thing that she was the best at the world at doing, which was this payroll service for nannies. Well, flash forward 25 years, she's got $9 million in revenue and 10,000 customers. So over a 25-year period, that's not a juggernaut. That's not a hyper-growth company. That's a good, steady, solid, growing company. 25 years, $9 million in revenue. She sells it for $54 million, which is, as you know, I mean, that's a crazy multiple, right? It's like 6 times, whatever it is, 6 times revenue. It's a totally ridiculous multiple. But the reason she was able to get such a high valuation is because she sold it to a strategic. And the strategic was Care.com. Care.com is like the Angie's List of care providers, right? You put your zip code in, and it'll give you a list of care providers in your neighborhood. At the time of the acquisition, Care had 7 million subscribers. And so what Stephanie did is said, look, I've got 10,000 customers and a great little profitable $9 million business. If you cross-sell our payroll services to your 7 million subscribers, if just 1% of them buy, that's 70,000 customers. That's a business 7 times the size of ours today. If 2% of your customers buy, well, you do the math. If 10% of your customers buy, it's a huge win. Anyways, that's how Stephanie convinced Care.com to spend $54 million for a $9 million company. It comes down to, what is the business, your business, worth in someone else's hands? And I can tell you that Breedlove's company would have been worthless to Care.com if she had reached that point in the fork in the road at $300,000 in sales and said, well, geez, it's way easier to go sell additional services to parents with, kids, than if she had doubled down on the one thing she was uniquely wired to do, which was do payroll for nannies.
John, let's get you into your data geek, research geek mode for a few minutes. Talk about statistics, as it pertains to the value builders, the value builder system and the value drivers, the scoring, how it works, and the multiples involved. Just start to talk about that.
Oh, yeah. Pleasure. So I think, as I mentioned, all your clients can go to your website and talk to Pat about getting your score. When you get your score, it'll give you a score to 100. And the reason that's important is it kind of gives you a benchmark of where you're at. Of course, your work will be to improve your score over time. I can tell you the average, having done now 46,000 assessments, is 59, as I mentioned earlier. So 59 is the average score. So first thing to do is get your score so that at least you know kind of where you are sitting to average. What I can tell you is those businesses that achieve a score of 90 or greater, and by the way, that rarely happens without the help of a certified value builder. So once they've worked with you for a period of time, you can help them improve their score on these 8 key drivers. If they were to get their score all the way up to 90, 2 things happen. Number one, the value of their business statistically basically doubles. So the average owner with a business that's achieving a value builder score of 90 or greater is getting an offer of 7.1 times pre-tax profit, or more than double when they started the system. The second thing that happens is it improves the likelihood that you'll in fact receive an offer. And that gets back to the fact that people with a value builder score of 90 or greater are 3 times more likely to have received a written offer. And again, that's not that you necessarily want to sell, but if you did want to sell, you're in the driver's seat. You control the negotiation process. So that's really the kind of core, some of the kind of founding statistics around the system.
Yeah. So, John, when we talk to owners who either are or aren't thinking about their eventual exit, most of the time they're not. And we get into a conversation with them. It's likely we're going to hear this: I'm not ready to exit yet. Or I can't think about the future so much. I need to think about now. I need to keep the lights on. I need to drive revenue. I need to make sales today. I can't think about tomorrow so much. If I don't do that, there may not be a tomorrow. How would you respond to that objection or response from a business owner?
Yeah. So 2 things. one is, there won't be a tomorrow if I don't focus on today. And the other is I'm not ready to sell. So there won't be a tomorrow because, I would say the reason you feel like you're running on a hamster wheel and you're just, whack-a-mole putting out fires is because you're stuck in the owner's trap and your business is too deeply dependent on you personally. And so, it's like saying, I can't work out because I'm heavy. Well, the reason you're heavy is you don't work out. So you got to start somewhere. And as hard as it is to get a 300-pound body off the couch, you have to do it. You start small. You start with 50 yards, 100 yards, a half a mile, whatever. You start, because as the more weight you lose, the easier it is to continue to work out. And it's in the same way, the more you can make some of these very small incremental changes to your business, they have an effect of creating a bit of a virtuous cycle. So you stop selling one thing. You're that window cleaner, and you stop, selling residential window cleaning, and you focus in on commercial. You will find that in and of itself frees up a whole set of resources, time, money, and so forth, to help you double down on the thing where you do have a point of differentiation. You are getting better margins. So you have to start, because there's a virtuous cycle that gets triggered, a domino effect that gets triggered when you get off the couch and make those first 50, 100-yard steps. That's number one. Number two, the point about, I'm not ready to retire or I'm not ready to sell, I would go back to a little tool we have for Value Builder users, and you guys would I'm sure take clients through this as well, called the exit timer, where it simply graphically shows for an owner how long it takes to actually leave their business. So here's what happens. When you sell your business, you don't flip a switch, and most owners think it's like selling a home, right? You kind of paint the fence, maybe change the some of the basically things in the house. You stage it a little bit, and you sell it a month or two later. Selling a business is a much more complicated process. Getting a business ready to sell could take years, literally. Once you flip the switch and actually hire an M&A professional to sell your company, it will again take another 6 months or a year for them to properly market your business and go through a diligence phase and so forth. And then most businesses in the United States that sell today have what's called an earnout associated with them, where the owner will agree to a set of future targets as a division of the acquirer. So when you take into consideration the average length of an earnout in the United States today is 3 years, you add to that the year it takes you to negotiate the sale of your business, that's a year. So that's 4 years of work after the fact that you pull the trigger on hiring the M&A professional. So if you're like, I think by the time I'm 60, I want to be out. Well, really, if you're in your early 50s, now's the time to really start. And so many of us ride it over the top, right? We think that the good times are going to go on forever. And this is really, for folks who went through the 2008, 2009 Great Recession, once bit, twice shy, what a recession feels like. How difficult that is to ride out. But for folks who started a little earlier, or more recently, I should say, they might not have that experience and may be tempted to ride it over the top. And what I mean by that is really thinking the good times will go on forever. I'm reminded, I don't know if you guys caught this interview. I did an interview with a guy named Rand Fishkin. Did you hear that interview? So it was an interview I did with this guy who built a company called Moz. He built it up to $5.7 million in revenue when he received an acquisition offer from HubSpot, a kind of quasi-competitor of his. And HubSpot was offering $25 million of HubSpot stock and cash to buy Moz. So, even though it was a software company, it was still a great multiple for Rand. Rand had it in his head that he wanted to get 4 times future revenue for his business. He was expecting his business to get to $10 million that year. So he wanted 40 in cash. HubSpot was offering $25 million in cash and stock. As you might imagine, they couldn't make a deal. Rand walked, and he brought in venture capital instead. He got a $19 million round of venture capital, built up the business in lots of different directions. flush with cash, he started a bunch of different products and services, many of which were not differentiated, many of which sucked cash and started to fail. Ultimately, the venture capitalist kicked Rand out of the company. He resigned, but was to some degree kind of forced to resign. He is now the minority shareholder in a company for which the venture capitalists have preferred rights on an exit, meaning they'll get all their money before Rand gets any of his equity out. Rand revealed during the interview that he has a net worth of $800,000 today, most of which he's about to spend on elder care for his grandparents. Had he accepted the HubSpot offer, HubSpot, as you know, went on to go public. The $25 million offer of cash and stock would today be worth over $200 million. That's called riding it over the top. That's the best time to sell your company is when someone wants to buy it. And that means having a business that's ready to sell, regardless of whether you want to sell it, is the best insurance possible ever designed. It is the best insurance policy because you know that if and when you're ready, you will have lots of buyers. And again, the best time to sell is when somebody approaches you with an offer you can't refuse. So many of us think, hey, the good times will roll forever, and we end up riding over the top.
So, John, with that example in mind, one of the key principles that 8 drivers of company value is growth potential. Mm-hmm. And there can be this sense, I think, that growth potential has to be a hockey stick to be incredibly valuable. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, for sure. So first of all, remember, for most entrepreneurs, I sometimes do talks for entrepreneurs, and I'll ask them, hey, if you could equate running a business to a sport, like what would it be? Would it be like hockey or baseball or wrestling? Like, what would you say them? And most of them say it's like running a marathon, right? It's an unglamorous, sweaty slog, right? You do it for years and decades, and by the end, you're just willing your body over the finish line, right? You have to remember that while the exit is your finish line, for an acquirer, it's their starting line, right? So you've built the business up to $5 million, and it's taken every ounce of your energy, every dollar in your wallet, everything you've got to get it to that point. The acquirer looks at it and says, okay, it's a great little business, $5 million in revenue. I think we can buy it and get it to $50 million in revenue. They need to understand that how they're going to scale your business, because for them, they haven't just run 26 miles. For them, they're just about to start. And so they need to know what's the growth potential. What new markets could we enter? What new products could we launch? What cross-selling opportunities are there? So they really need to see the future of your business. I'm reminded of the guy, what's his name? Rod Drury. Have you ever heard the story of Rod, the guy who started Aftermail?
Yep.
You ever seen somebody? Yeah. So if you haven't seen it, it's a great story. He started, Sarbanes-Oxley came about. And so all the companies that had to adhere to the Sarbanes-Oxley legislation overnight were trying to figure out how do they deal with archiving email to comply with Sarbanes-Oxley. And so this guy, Rod Drury, a Kiwi, New Zealand guy, comes up with this software solution, and he goes out and sells it to 2 of the Fortune 500 companies, right? It's a great solution, allows them to stay compliant, and he sells it to them for $1 million. So he's got $2 million of revenue after his first year in business. Now, what do 9 out of 10 entrepreneurs do at that point? They say, great, we've got a $2 million business on the backs of 2 clients. Let's go sell to the other 498 Fortune 500 companies. Rod takes a different tactic. He says, this is the perfect time to sell my company. I've got a proven business that's worked, but I'm not going to get greedy and harvest all of the field. So he goes to one of the big systems integrators, one of the guys the Fortune 500 companies who do systems integration work, who have literally all of the Fortune 500 companies as pre-existing clients, first name relationship with the CIOs, et cetera. And he says, look, you guys already have the 498 Fortune 500 companies we haven't sold to yet. Why don't you just acquire our product and sell it to them? They bought Rod's $2 million business for $35 million. Like, it's a ridiculous valuation. And again, I keep throwing out these numbers like Stephanie Breedlove, and I'm sure your listeners are going to have these crazy inflated. I don't mean to make it sound easy to sell a business for those kind of multiples, because it's
thanks.
not.
Yeah.
But,
No, it isn't.
But
it isn't.
But the story that Rod, the kind of moral of the story is remember that for the acquirer, they are starting a marathon and they need to know there's upside.
Yeah. So as I consider the value builder process, it's very clear. There's simple steps. How much time does it actually take for a business owner to realize value in engaging in the process? Because Stephanie, for instance, took 25 years in your example.
Yeah.
So speak to that if you would.
Yeah. And John, and as you're doing that, John, earlier you made a comment. You were given an example of a company that was sold at a good multiple because they had the value drivers in place and strong. And you said something along the lines of, and that would have only happened through with a certified value builder. So if you could kind of respond to both those things together, that would be terrific.
Yeah, sure thing. So the research that comes to mind immediately when you talk about the question, like how long does it take, and what's the role, the role of the certified value builder? It reminds me of a study we did last year where we took a cohort of 30 business owners ranging in revenue from roughly $1 million up to $10 million in revenue. And we worked with one certified value builder. So we knew there wasn't any difference between the advice they were getting. It was the same certified value builder that was taking all 30 business owners through the value builder system. And they all started off, the first thing he did with all 30 is got their value builder score. And then he worked with them over a period of 8 months. And after 8 months, the average improvement in value was 18%. And so, you think about that. Most business owners I know, their business is their biggest asset. Yeah, they might have a 401k, they might own a house or a boat, but really their business is their biggest asset. Now, I also think, I go back and say, okay, well, how much did your house grow in value over the last 8 months? Probably not 18%. How much did your 401k go up in value over the last 8 months? We've had a good little run in the stock market, but it's nowhere near 18%. And so I think, that's the answer to your question. I think growing value is something you do in perpetuity. It's not something you start and stop. It's not like an MBA where you start and 4 years later no, it's something you do in perpetuity. As a business owner, it's the job description, growing value of your company. No matter what entrepreneur you look at, Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, any of the famous entrepreneurs that we all admire, these people take the view that they are building company value over the long term. And so I think, number one, take a long-term view of it. And if you can grow your value by 18% in just 8 months, imagine what you could do over 3 years, over 5 years. I mean, it starts to really be compelling.
Yeah, so John, you have been extremely generous with your time here with us today. We really appreciate it. But take whatever amount of time here at the close to share any parting advice, parting comments, thoughts that might benefit the listeners today. And then, two, also suggest at least one next step for listeners in pursuing, building sellable value.
Yeah. So just, we talked about a lot, and I think if you wanted to distill a fairly wide-ranging conversation down to maybe a theme or two, really the big theme I want to leave your listeners with is that for your business to have value, it's really got to work and thrive without you personally. And that's really the crux of creating a valuable, transferable business is doesn't have value without the owner. And that's a lifelong journey, but I think it's worth starting right away. And the best thing you can do, I really feel passionately about this, is know where you're at today. So if I could provide folks with sort of one action item leaving here, it's complete the Value Builder questionnaire. Takes about 10 minutes. Pat, you can provide information on how to do it. It's not an arduous process. You don't need to call your accountant and get your financial statements. Based on what you know in your head about your business, you can complete the question in about 10 minutes. But what it'll do is give you a starting point. It'll allow you to benchmark where you're at relative to your peers, relative to other companies in your industry. And then you can start to make these incremental changes and see the value of your company grow in lockstep. So if I had one sort of request, it would be, email Pat and get your Value Builder score, because I think that's the place to start.
Very good. Corb, do you have any, in addition to that, any closing takeaways for the listeners?
A handful of recaps almost, that the focus needs to be on the value of the business long term, and the business is actually the product. An entrepreneur should be selling, if you will, building, not necessarily the widget that they sell. Uh-huh. And then just the guy on the couch, getting off the couch, taking the small steps is the beginning of prepping for the marathon.
Right, the 300-pound guy on the couch?
Yep, the 300-pound guy
on the couch. Let's get up and take some incremental steps.
Yep, and there's a massive impact.
We're not going to run a marathon today, but let's take a few steps.
You might walk around the block, and that's an improvement over where you are.
Right.
So,
Yeah, so listeners, let's do that. Let's take John's advice today and start to build a company, or continue to. You might be doing a good job of this already, and building value apart from yourself. That was a key point that he made there toward the end. And let's also take his advice and go to our Build Value page on our website, ennislp.com. It'll take you 10 minutes, really. Invest 10 minutes in the Value Builder score questionnaire. We'll send you a summary of the scores on each value driver and a compilation score. And we here, Corby and I, we would also encourage you to buy and read both of John's books, Built to Sell and The Automatic Customer. Again, must reads. And in honor of John's participation here on the podcast today, we're going to send a copy of Built to Sell to the first 5 listeners who complete that questionnaire on ennislp.com. And finally, on July 31st, here in Rockville at the Learn Center, we are conducting our second Exit Readiness Base Camp. The morning session, it's a one-day workshop for business owners. The morning sessions are focused on these value drivers that John was reviewing today, and that make up the Value Builder system. The morning sessions will be focused on the value drivers in the Value Builder system, and the afternoon sessions focused on a more personal exit checklist that was developed by John and his team at the Value Builder system. And we will provide a 25% discount on the registration fee for anyone who uses the following code when registering: Built to Sell, with no spaces and all lowercase. And you can register at ennislp.com. Just look for the announcement bar at the top of the site. And if you'd like to reach out to either us here at Ennis Legacy Partners or Walter Dial regarding building the value of your business or planning your exit, you can reach our firm at 301-859-0860 and Walter at 301-951-9090. John, thank you so very much. We can't thank you enough. You've been a phenomenal rock star guest, just like we told everybody you would be. And we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh, great. Pleasure to be with you.
Okay, so until next time on the Exit Readiness Podcast, this is Pat Ennis and Corby McGordon signing off.